For nearly a decade, it was one of the biggest mysteries in crypto. Who stole 50,000 bitcoins, which would ultimately be worth more than $3 billion, from a dark web site called the Silk Road? No one knew until the man behind the crime made a costly mistake.
It's November 2021. A quiet lake house in Gainesville, Georgia, suddenly becomes the stage for one of the largest financial seizures in American history. Federal agents rip up floorboards, tear through concrete, and search every corner for hidden treasure. What they find isn't cash stacked to the ceiling or bars of gold locked in a vault. Instead, it was something worth of $3.4 billion. It was the digital keys to more than 50,000 Bitcoin. The man behind it all was Jimmy Zhong, a shy, awkward computer enthusiast who had been hiding in plain sight. For nearly a decade, he kept his secret buried, living like a king on stolen wealth that no one even realized was missing. But one mistake, a single misstep, unraveled everything. This is the story of Jimmy Zhong, the man who stole from the Silk Road, outsmarted the dark web, and almost got away with billions, until 1 minute mistake caught him red-handed. Jimmy Zhong never looked like the kind of man who would one day hold billions of dollars in stolen Bitcoin. On the outside, he seemed ordinary, friendly, talkative, and generous. The kind of guy who always picked up the bill at the bar, who threw parties just to have people around him. But behind that image was something else entirely. Jimmy's story began far from the wealth he flaunted in his 20s. Born in Shanghai in 1990, he grew up in Georgia, the son of Chinese immigrants. His parents' marriage collapsed when he was still young. His mother had to work endless nursing shifts, and Jimmy, shy, overweight, and different, slipped through the cracks. At school, the bullying was relentless. Kids mocked him, shoved him, reminded him daily that he didn't belong. And while no one noticed it then, Jimmy was quietly living with undiagnosed autism, a disorder that only deepened his sense of isolation. So he did what many lonely kids of the early 2000s did. He vanished into the glow of a computer screen. There, Jimmy wasn't the awkward outsider. Online, he could be anyone. He taught himself code, dove deep into forums, and found refuge in the anonymity of the internet. By the time he made it to the University of Georgia, Jimmy had two identities: the brilliant computer whiz and the desperate kid who wanted to be liked. And that second identity, it took over him slowly. At college, Jimmy discovered alcohol, drugs, and the rush of being the life of the party. He threw money around recklessly, keeping stacks of cash in a suitcase just to show off. He booked expensive trips, rented out mansions, even talked about impressing girls by flashing his wealth. For a while, it worked. Jimmy became the party guy, the one with the lake house, the Lamborghini, the endless supply of fun. But deep down, it was all smoke and mirrors. Because Jimmy Zhong wasn't just a rich kid spending his fortune. He wasn't rich at all. He was sitting on a secret, one so big it would make him one of the most wanted men in the world. It was 2012. The Silk Road was in its prime, a hidden marketplace buried deep in the dark web, anonymous, untouchable, and fueled entirely by Bitcoin. To most people, it was a terrifying rumor, a place where you could buy drugs, forged passports, even weapons. But to Jimmy Zhong, it was opportunity. At first, Jimmy wasn't there to steal. He was just another customer, using Silk Road to fuel his growing drugs habit. But then, something strange happened. One night, Jimmy went to withdraw some Bitcoin he had deposited on the site. He clicked the button. And then, by accident, he clicked again. When the transaction processed, the system didn't just return his deposit once, it doubled it. Jimmy had stumbled onto a flaw, what hackers call a race condition. The site's withdrawal system couldn't handle rapid, repeated requests. And if you moved fast enough, you could trick it into paying you over and over again. For a computer whiz like Jimmy, it was like finding the cheat code to a video game, and he started withdrawing. At first, it was small, a few extra withdrawals, a couple of test runs. But soon, Jimmy realized the scale of what he had uncovered. With 9 fake accounts, he deposited small amounts of Bitcoin like 200 here, 500 there. And then, using scripts and rapid-fire clicks, he drained the system dry. By the time he was done, Jimmy Zhong had pulled off one of the biggest digital heists in history, more than 50,000 Bitcoin. At the time, it was worth around $620,000, a staggering fortune for a 22-year-old college kid. But Jimmy couldn't have imagined what those coins would become. Because over the next decade, as Bitcoin exploded in value, his stash would grow to more than $3.4 billion. And the craziest part, nobody noticed. Not Silk Road, not law enforcement, not anyone. Jimmy had just stolen a king's ransom from the most notorious black market empire on the internet. And he'd gotten away with it. Or so he thought. For most criminals, stealing is the easy part. The real challenge is hiding. But Jimmy Zhong, he knew this better than anyone. If you have an idea about the Bitcoin transactions, then you will know that every transaction is written forever on the blockchain, a public ledger that anyone can see. On the surface, it looks anonymous, just strings of numbers moving back and forth. But in reality, it's like leaving footprints in fresh snow. They may be hard to trace, but they're always there. Jimmy understood that. He was obsessed with it. On forums, he talked openly about Bitcoin mixers, services that scrambled transactions, breaking the chain of evidence between wallets. To friends, he claimed he'd mined thousands of coins back in 2009. A cover story for the massive stash he secretly held. And for years, it worked. Jimmy lived like a ghost. He bought luxury homes near his old college campus. He partied on boats and private jets. He drove Lamborghinis, handed out cash like candy, and threw legendary parties that made him famous in Athens, Georgia. To outsiders, he was the mysterious young millionaire, the guy who'd gotten rich on Bitcoin before anyone else. And for nearly 10 years, Jimmy pulled off the impossible. He looked like a king while living like a prisoner of his own paranoia. Because he knew the truth. He hadn't just stolen Bitcoin. He had stolen it from Silk Road, a criminal empire that the FBI was already hunting. And every day, as Bitcoin's value soared higher and higher, so did the risk that someone, somewhere, would finally connect the dots. Jimmy thought he had outsmarted everyone. But the smallest slip, the tiniest mistake, would be all it took to bring the whole house of cards crashing down. For almost a decade, Jimmy Zhong looked untouchable. The FBI had seized the Silk Road and thrown its founder, Ross Ulbricht, behind bars. Other hackers had been caught, other fortunes lost. But Jimmy, he was still free, still partying, still rich. Then he slipped. It started with something small. On March 13, 2019, Jimmy called 911. He claimed his Athens, Georgia home had been broken into and that hundreds of thousands of dollars in cryptocurrency had been stolen. To him, it was a burglary. To investigators, it was a flashing red light. Why would anyone keep nearly $500,000 in crypto just sitting around? Why would someone report it so casually? Local police were baffled. But when the case landed on the desk of the IRS's Cybercrime unit, alarms went off. They started digging. And then came the fatal move, the mistake Jimmy could never undo. In September 2019, he transferred about $800 worth of Bitcoin to a cryptocurrency exchange. Just a small test, a routine transaction. But this exchange had something Silk Road never did. KYC rules, know your customer. That meant an ID check, an IP address, a name. And the name on that account was Jimmy Zhong. In an instant, investigators had the missing link. The anonymous whale who had siphoned 50,000 bitcoins from Silk Road nearly a decade earlier was no longer a ghost. He had a face. He had an address. He had a target painted squarely on his back. The IRS joined forces with local police and were quietly building their case. For more than 2 years, Jimmy had no idea he was being under surveillance. Every transfer, every wallet, every move he made on the blockchain, investigators were following the trail straight to his front door. The perfect crime was over. And Jimmy Zhong didn't even know it yet. It was a quiet morning in November 2021 when Jimmy's perfect world finally shattered. Federal agents, armed with months of surveillance and blockchain evidence, descended on his lavish lakefront home in Gainesville, Georgia. To the neighbors, it looked like a scene out of a crime drama. To Jimmy, it was the end of the life he had built on lies. The agents swept through the property, searching every corner. At first glance, the house looked ordinary enough, the kind of mansion you'd expect from a young Bitcoin millionaire. But investigators weren't looking for jewelry or cash. They were hunting for billions in stolen cryptocurrency, hidden in places no one would think to look. And what they found was almost unbelievable. Under the bathroom closet, inside a Cheetos popcorn tin, agents discovered a single-board computer. It wasn't much bigger than a deck of cards, but on it were the keys to an empire, digital wallets containing billions in Bitcoin. In the basement, sniffer dogs trained to detect electronics led agents to a floor safe buried under tiles and concrete. Inside, stacks of cash, gold and silver bars, and even physical Bitcoin coins minted in crypto's early days. Everywhere they looked, Jimmy had hidden pieces of his fortune. Hard drives, flash drives, encrypted wallets, scattered like breadcrumbs across his home. By the time the search was over, investigators had seized 50,676 Bitcoin. At the moment of the raid, that stash was worth over $3.36 billion. It was one of the largest cryptocurrency seizures in American history. In November 2022, Jimmy Zhong finally stood in court and pled guilty to a single count of wire fraud. With that plea, he surrendered everything: the Bitcoin, the gold, the cash, the luxury homes. 10 years of secrets, erased in one moment. By April 2023, the sentence was handed down. 1 year and 1 day in federal prison. A light punishment when weighed against the billions he had stolen. By the summer of 2024, Jimmy was free again. No longer the billionaire king of hidden Bitcoin, just another man starting over with nothing. Jimmy Zhong's story isn't just about greed. It's about loneliness, desperation, and the illusion of invincibility. A bullied kid who found power in code only to be destroyed by it. For nearly 10 years, he outsmarted the world. But in the end, one mistake, one tiny slip, exposed everything. The lesson? No matter how deep you hide, no matter how clever the scheme, in the digital age, the truth has a way of catching up. This was the story of Jimmy Zhong, the man who almost got away with $3.4 billion,